Okay, so our next session is about evolution of the blockchain as technology. Presented by the Distinguished Engineering Head of Architect and Design at S&P, Mr. Thomas Zakrzewski. Thomas is a frequent speaker at internal and external conferences discussing blockchain technologies and risk models. He has over 25 years of IT experiences in software engineering, financials, telecom, e-commerce, distribution, and healthcare. Please welcome Thomas.
To run a little video. Let's see how this is going to work. Yeah, the video first, please. It's going to be very short, just 1 minute and a half, but I'm so glad to have all the speakers before me because I will try basically to connect all the dots.
That little mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At?
See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard it.
Around.
I'd never heard it said. I'd always seen the
Right.
mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
I heard something
around
big
or
fun
about.
up in the lunchroom the other
See,
week.
there it is. Violence at NBC. GE com. I mean,
Well, Allison should know.
what
do you
is
think of that,
internet
Allison?
anyway?
Internet is that
Massive computer
right,
network.
the one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
No, she can't say anything in 10 seconds or less.
Oh, Allison will be in the studio shortly.
What is
What
it?
does it mean?
It's a giant computer network made up of started from.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us what this was.
It's
So
like
they're
a
looking at the
computer
dictionary.
billboard.
It's not an. It's a computer billboard, but it's
Right.
nationwide. And it's several universities and everything all joined together.
Right.
And others can access it.
And,
Right.
And it's getting bigger and bigger all the time.
It
Just
came
great.
in really handy during the quake. A lot of people, that's how they were communicating out to tell family and loved ones they were okay because all the phone lines were down.
I was telling Katie another
But you
time.
don't need that. You don't need a phone line to operate
No,
internet.
no.
Okay, so this video has been actually made at 1994. I guess I'm starting revealing my age, which might be really good. But 2.5 decades before, right, we have the born of internet, right? And then we cannot live within the internet, right? I mean, in one of these pictures, the sessions before, I saw the triangle, right? And the internet was around the bottom of it, okay? That just speaks the value, right? Decade ago, the blockchain has been born. Okay, so you can just imagine what the speed we're going at. So in my session, I like to just talk about the evolution of the blockchain. I'm a distinguished engineer at the S&P Global. I've been working with blockchain, not necessarily with the blockchain itself, but since 1996, when I was at IBM, I was basically working on a cryptography, which is the client server certificates. I was also working back then in a consensus algorithm for the Saga distributed systems, Saga distributed transactions. And all those consensus algorithms are based basically on the same principles. So these technologies, with the exception of the peer-to-peer computing, has been long-standing over 2 decades. Okay, that's probably makes me an expert in that. I've been actually working in a blockchain since 2015 at S&P Global, and I'm heading the blockchain task force, educating our business partners in all divisions, and also working with the various technology group. Is that middle button? There we go. So, speaking about the evolution, we have to know what the blockchain is. And I know that you have seen probably hundreds of different videos and explanations of it, but whenever I sit with my business units and I try to explain the blockchain, I never start with the technology. Because whenever I try to explain World Wide Web years ago, I never start with what the TCP IP is or UDP is, right? I mean, cookies probably everybody knows by now. But I never start with the technology. So let me start with the statement that the blockchain simplifies and streamlines an execution of the complex workflows. Now, you see the financial workflows. Just because I'm working in the financials, I've been for almost 2 decades in the financial systems. Okay, so that's why I'm mainly focused on that. But there are healthcare, logistics. There's other sectors that the blockchain fits very nicely. On average, 50% of the effort to write an application is really the plumbing of this application. What the plumbing means is just the orchestrations, security, synchronization, manageability, okay, and interoperability between the different nodes that speak with this application. So if we'll do on a blockchain, the blockchain actually gives you that infrastructure so you can be as twice productive as normally. That means that you can only focus on a business logic. You, of course, have to have some groups that put together all the smart contracts where we'll talk about this. Okay, but for the simplicity, okay, you'll be much more productive on a blockchain than with the regular frameworks. Now, from the technology point of view, right, it's really a distributed ledger of transaction records. So you can see on the left-hand side, this is like a regular paper with all the transactions, one by one, credit, debit, or whatever that transaction denotes. And they are basically packed into the blocks, into basically a bucket of transactions. And each of this bucket, okay, it's called the block. And those blocks are linked together by the miners. Okay, so the miners is nothing else but basically validating these blocks and are agreeing upon that, hey, this block is valid in this particular space of the blockchain. Now, transactions are recorded, they are sequentially, they're timestamped, and etc. Okay, so there is a lot of other things that goes with the blockchain. I'm not going to do explanation of those because it will take more than the 20 minutes that I have today. Now, 4 major principles, okay, and you have to remember these 4 principles because based on those 4 principles, there are a variety of different use cases. Okay, so there is a transparency, meaning that each transaction is transparent, is visible to all the transacted parties, right? And there are 2 types of blockchains. One is the private, the other is the public. We'll talk about this in a second, okay? But the difference is the privacy of the data. So in a private blockchain, you only see the transactions that you're basically permitted to see it, okay? And you don't have to be a transacted parties, okay? You could be a regulators, actually. But in a private, you only have to see basically transacted permission parties. Now, public blockchain, as you know, everybody can connect to it, and everybody can see anything. On the operations side, and that's what makes basically the workflow streamlined. Okay, because it forces all the blockchain parties to speak the same protocol, okay? Use the same underlying technology. And that's basically twice as much basically to be productive. Now, important thing permanency is that once you write the transaction to the block, okay, to the blockchain, that recorded transaction cannot be erased. And that creates a lot of issues as well, right? Because what if you made the mistakes and etc. You know, and these are the problems that the people are working on, how to basically just reconcile the bad records, okay, what to do with this. But this is more from the legal point of view. The technology point of view, that has been solved actually in a trading markets, right? If you have a bad trade, you just put in another trade, basically that makes the other trade validated and says, well, this is the trade, this is the link to the trade, and we made a correction to this trade. But the permanency comes with the transparency, and I think this is a good thing because then we can actually say what happened exactly to that. Okay, even if the first one was wrong, the next one is correct. We have all the records. Security. I have to say something about security because I hear this over and over and over. All right. The security in a blockchain is really a 2-sided. Okay, and it's only 2 sides, unfortunately. Okay, due to decentralization nature of the blockchain. Okay, we have security of resiliency. Okay, so it's really the security side. There is a resiliency side of the security, meaning that if you have hundreds of thousands of computers and each one of these computers holds the log of transactions, even if a big portion of that has been compromised, you can basically restore this. Okay, so that's the portion of the security we're talking about. And the other side of the security is verifiable authenticity. Okay, now if you think that you can use the private and public key to encrypt and store this in a blockchain, you have to think twice about this, okay? Because the security in a blockchain is not meant for the encryption, okay? Because encryption is between the two parties, okay? You have a private key and a public key that you share with your counterparty that can actually read the things that has been encrypted with the private key. Now, when you start sharing in a public blockchain, okay, everybody will know your public key. All right, so that's one thing. So it's not really meant to encrypt your records, okay? It's meant to authenticate the records, okay, and the transacted parties. That's what really security is about. Now, what is a blockchain used for, okay? So I just combine these into the two groups, okay? But you can basically just do the any permutations of that, okay? So there's efficiency and a transparency. Okay, and you have basically from that, you have automation of transaction workflows, deterministic and transparent workflow execution, minimization of risk during the logistic operations. I will speak about this a little bit later. Okay, publicly available disclosures, and these are many. Okay, each company has to basically disclose, public company, of course, has to disclose their financial information. What they usually do is send that to Security Exchange Commission database, okay? And there are a lot of companies actually that scrape this information, like Edmar Online, and sell that at the premium to other entities that seek this information. So, government actually have to maintain this database. Is very costly, as you know. The government is very expensive. Okay, so if we'll use the blockchain, it's going to be a much more easier and verifiable. That particular company actually posts that financial disclosure. There is also government disclosures, right? I mean, the government owns us, okay, to put their actually financial statements, what they do, how they do, whether their money are appropriate correctly, right, to the programs they claim to be. Okay, so they also running the huge IT systems. It's very costly, so if they're going to put this in a blockchain, it's going to be less costly to each population that sponsors the government. And ESG, that's something that has been on the radar of probably every corporate structure, right? I mean, this is environmental, social, governance, criteria, compliance, okay? So we need to know basically whether the company produces your carbon and how much they produce and etc. The social, whether they are basically social responsible company, that they have an inclusion, they have a diversity, and whether the governance criteria compliance, whether they comply basically with the governance criteria. Okay, so there's a lot of companies, including our company, S&P Global, that actually gets our hands in it. Okay, but that also could be on a blockchain and could be verifiable on the blockchain. Not necessarily has to be every node verify basically where the company has been posted the right information, but it could be basically just a few companies that are in a space and can validate, let's say 3 out of 5, that they can actually prove it or validate that this company is in truth posted the right information. And then we have another group, which is the interoperability in easy network access, and that's basically just because we have the common infrastructure or infrastructures. There is not going to be just the one blockchain, as you know. Okay, so we can have the simplified interaction between the transacted parties. Then new models for the data subscriptions. Okay, and this is the monetization of the new data, and also the IoT for all the devices. Okay, I mean, imagine, I remember there was a Genie network back in 1996 when I was at IBM. I was working basically on a Java right there, and that was a network Genie which basically all the devices, like toasters, TV, and refrigerators, everything, they basically could connect to each other. Okay, so this is really a good use case for that, and there is actually a consortium, IoT consortium has been formed, and that could be actually a private blockchain. Okay, because someone has to monetize into this. Someone has to basically make the money on that to run this. However, the private doesn't mean that you don't have the access to it. Okay, private means, okay, that you may actually have the access to the data, and you can actually maintain this blockchain chain. What private in that context could be, it could be a self-register. Okay, so let's assume that we have the IoT device, such as the drones. Okay, so anytime the drone shows up in the air, okay, it can actually register with this, self-register, okay, and put the information we have seen about the weather condition, about disaster condition, or about shipping on a sea, or basically just the traffic in a parking lot. So you can basically validate what's the revenue is going to be for the Macy's or for the other supermarkets or stores, right? So as I promised, private versus public. Okay, so the major thing, the difference between the public and the private, is the privacy of the data. Okay, and why is that? Well, in a public like Ethereum or the public blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, okay, anybody can get to it, and anybody can basically get all the transactions that are posted. Okay, now in a private blockchain like a hyperledger, okay, or there's quite a few, like Quorum is another one that we are very working on it. Okay, they are verified by designated nodes. Okay, and when you define the smart contract with the application, I will talk about the smart contracts in the next slide, but when you verify this application, when you verify that smart contract, okay, you basically, in the smart contract, you designate who can see what. Okay, so that's why it's a permission. And of course, you can have the operator, and the operators could be consortiums. Okay, but they are basically just to give you the access to the network, not necessarily to execute particular smart contracts. Okay, how that division of the roles has been basically foreseen is that the network operator will operate a network. Okay, and it will basically permission you to access the network. Okay, but the smart contract itself will permission you to see the data, to participate in a smart contract. Now, privacy of the data and how important that is. Well, I had the pleasure to work with our chief privacy officer at the S&P Global. And we have actually long discussions about the privacy, and especially in some jurisdictions like Europe, for example. If you think about the GDPR, okay, the GDPR is a book. It's a book of regulations, basically, but it's all related to the data, okay, to right to forgotten, and etc. Now, that actually right to forgotten, as you know, doesn't exist in the blockchain. All right, especially in a private blockchain, public blockchains, right? Whatever it's there already. Okay, so you have to be very careful how you design the smart contract. Okay, so you're going to basically comply with local regulations and jurisdictions. Same thing in China. Okay, when you put basically certain data, okay, in the China territory, that data cannot leave the China territory. Okay, now, as you know, the blockchains are basically a piece that goes across borders. There's no notion of the border for the blockchain. Okay, so those kind of things you have to keep in mind when you design the smart contracts that operates on the various chains. Now, what is a smart contract? All right, the smart contract is a blockchain application. Okay, and it's a series, basically, of steps of the workflow, okay, and it's driven by programmable logic. So it's literally like if then else, if then else. Each step has the if then else, okay. And now each of this step, okay, have to have some kind of a data, okay? Because if it doesn't have the data, then you cannot make a distinction between the one step or the other branch, right? So you have to have a data. Now, ultimate state of execution for the workflows, those workflows, so smart contracts, is to be fully automated, autonomous, and deterministic. So what that really tells you, okay, that tells you there's no human interaction, okay, between the steps in a smart contract. Okay, so your effort, okay, goes before you deploy that smart contract and execute the contract. You have to make sure, okay, that is deterministic, so you know all the paths of the execution, right? Because once it goes through it, that's it. You cannot really reverse, okay? Whatever happens, it happens, okay? Then it's a transparent execution. That's the beauty thing about this, okay? So whenever each of the step of the workflow is executed, you can actually look at that point in time, okay, where's that basically smart contract is. And there are also legal implications for smart contract execution, and I said that before, right? Because what if there's no force majeure, okay, in these contracts? These are not like illegal contracts. So there's a lot of lawyers actually working on what that really means in a court of law, execution of the smart contracts, okay? Because smart contracts are not really smart, they're really done, okay? These are the steps, executed steps, okay? It's something that me and you and a bunch of other programmers, developers, okay, are going to put into the paper. And we have to then make sure, okay, that OR represents the business workflow, okay? And we have to make sure that they are deterministic. Now, the special case of smart contracts are Oracle Data Services. I mentioned to you before that smart contract need the data. Either you hard code the data, or you basically one of the steps have basically the user interaction, but that's not what the ultimate state is of the smart contract, right? We want to do that autonomously, okay? So when you have the autonomous, you need to have a verifiable data. You need to have a smart data. You need to have a data, okay, that is really good. So now, the radical importance of trusted data is there, because if you know that the data is bad, okay, that autonomous vehicle could be actually go off the highway. So I compare the smart contract to the smart vehicle that runs on the highways of the blockchain and gets this data from the trusted party and execute this. If it gets good, it goes good. If it goes bad, it goes off the highway. So now the evolution of that. So we started with the payment system, okay? We go into the smart contracts, okay, which is capital markets, bond issuance, syndicate loans issues, derivative settlements, logistic distribution, etc. And this is the latest one, the tokenization of the assets, and this is the huge. We're talking about $600-700 trillion capitalization of the derivative assets. The options and derivatives altogether are probably $2 trillion, okay? So this is a huge, huge actual potential, and that's why all the banks are interested in it. Not everybody tells you what they do, okay, but trust me, they're working on the tokenization of the assets. This is the next thing. Now, what's the next? How much time do we have? Time's up. Just two quick slides, because I think this is really important, because I have seen that a couple speakers actually talked about this AI, right? So I'm also the academic student in predictive analytics from Northwestern University, so I can speak about this, right? So on the left-hand side, you have basically all the data, okay? And this is the regular journey data to predictive analytics, which is basically a part of the artificial intelligence. So from that point, what you got to do, you have to have the feature engineering or make that data to be structured, okay? And that's usually is 70% of the whole job of the data science. 70% is basically just dealing with the data, okay? Because after that, when you have a structured data, it's very quick. You basically do the modeling, which is very commoditized market, okay? There are so many models that you can pick it up, any of these models, try all of them if you want to, okay? picking up some, metrics, okay, and just to see which one is the best performing, and then you do decision making. So how blockchain helps you out, okay, because the blockchain actually has the structured data. So entrance point of the data scientists is like in a 2/3 of the whole journey, okay? So that's really important. That's basically just a speed up the process. And how's the AI, cybersecurity, and the blockchain articles work together? Well, here's the simple AI, okay, in a 2-3 steps. You have a child, okay, that you train, right? You have a supervised methods. You just knock him in and say, hey, you can't do this, you do this. If you do that, it's not going to be good. If you do this, it's going to be good. All right, so that's how you train. And then it's unsupervised, of course, right? When the child actually discovers the different things without the supervision. And then you have the input for the adult, and you have the output. So it's a decision based on analyze input, right? So now, artificial intelligence is nothing else but the same thing, okay? So you have basically a bunch of sensors, okay? But they are running basically on a certain models, okay? So you get these models data, okay? You train this AI, okay? And then the AI has the inputs, okay? And then based on those inputs, the AI act, okay? So now up to today, the paradigm has been that cybersecurity, the theft, was the stealing the data, claim the ransom, right? So we don't have that many AI, autonomous AI today, right? We have just a number of them. I know the Sprint has it, some couple of the banks have it, there's a couple of the companies are working on it, okay? Now, when we're going to have hundreds of thousands or even millions of those machines, think about it, what the damage and unintended consequences could be, okay? Because now, the cybersecurity could be not just the stealing the data, but putting the bad data. Think about driving an autonomous car, okay, and see that stop sign every 3 seconds. Okay, you're not going to move the car. You're going to basically stop the car, move the car, stop the car, move the car. Okay, so that is basically an example of the bad data. The same thing if you just hijack the GPS and it says, no, now you have to make a turn right. Okay, the car will go off, and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't even want to know. But the fact is, okay, that the blockchain, okay, has a unique property, right? Because it can validate, it can verify the data, okay, and based on a right data set, it can make a right decision. If you don't have that bad data, if you don't have a good data to make a decision, you're never going to make a good, basically, decision. So the blockchain is the next one that could save it. Okay, that was it for me, and I'm running out of time, but you can catch me afterward, and I'm also available on the LinkedIn. Thank you.